storage. Start down. We are discussing with respect to the concept of the state. And in the last class, I said the idea of state has transformed from the classical to the present in a very different way. So it is no longer rational state as we try to identify, because the state itself is controlled by the people who are elected. And when we say that people who are elected control the state, how do they control the state? They control the state through the exercise of power and authority. So power and authority is the last concept in political science, because when I started the classes, if you go through the syllabus, prescribed syllabus of the UPSC, you identify that the state is identified as one of the central concepts, followed by what purpose the state should address. The state should help in realization of justice in society, realization of justice within the individual, right? And in fact, this reconciliation between individual and the state is at the foremost in terms of justice. Thereafter, we try to identify that state helps in creating or treating everyone equal. So equality assumed to be the very next important idea in the modern context with respect to the relationship of the state. Because state helps in terms of treating everyone equal. Because societies do not. Societies maintain hierarchies in society. Societies do not recognize equality in society. There are hierarchies in society like caste hierarchy, gender hierarchy, religious hierarchy. Likewise, so when there are hierarchies within the society, then how to treat everyone equal? That is the central idea of the state. So modern state is preoccupied in terms of treating everyone as equal. So in this context, it recognizes equality both as a right as well as a policy intervention. Because societies refuse to entertain equality, the state was forced to intervene into the societal existence as part of social justice. So social justice identified state with respect to this interventionist dimension, where state will intervene in terms of promoting justice. So equality is central to state, followed by rights. Because when state try to intervene into the society, there has to be some limit with respect to the power exercised by the state. So in this context, the modern societies started identifying in the post-enlightenment phase the primacy of the individual. So modern states are, conceptually identify themselves in terms of promoting the individual freedom and autonomy. So individual freedom and autonomy can only be maintained if state guarantees certain rights, right? So this is again another intervention of the state. When societies maintain hierarchies, state guarantees the idea of freedom. So this is the objective. That's the reason why state is always identified in terms of realization of certain rational interest and rational purpose and rational objectives. But when the state is controlled by the form of government, because as I said in the last class, democracy is the most identified form of government. So democracy also differed from the classical and the contemporary even within the modern framework, because classical democracy identified itself with a protective and developmental function, whereas modern democracy is limited to pluralist and elitist form of government. So in this context, it is the mobilizational dimension or mobilizational aspect that dominates the idea of state in the present. So from that perspective, whether it is liberal state, socialist state, fascist state, or any other form of state. So all these identified characteristics of state is dependent on who controls the state. So Germany is a state today, for example. So Germany in the present is identified with liberal democracy. But same Germany under Hitler was identified in terms of promoting some sort of a social democracy. Why? Because nation itself is a collectively shared idea. So Hitler was not intended in terms of promoting the individual freedom, but instead he was promoting the collective freedom of the society. That was his objective. That is how even fascism as an ideology gained prominence and acceptance. Prominence and acceptance because not everyone in the society are opposed to that. If it was actually opposed, if majority of the people opposed fascism as a form of government, probably the ideas of fascism would have got destroyed. That did not happen. That did not happen. The ideas that appeared to be very predominant during Hitler's period even continues to survive even after 70 years. We find traces of these ideas which were remain dormant, re-emerging in majority of the societies because of the increasing intolerance within these societies. So form of government is very important in terms of understanding the political implication, right? From that point of view, today we will examine the last concept identified after democracy, that is power, authority, legitimacy and hegemony. When you talk about power, as I said, power is always identified with two dimensions. Either power is used to exercise and establish one's authority, because power acquires different meanings and different interpretations. It is not limited to any one particular dimension, because mostly when you look at political perspective, power is always identified with respect to some sort of a domination. Domination in the sense power helps in extracting obedience. So even if I don't accept the perspective of the people who govern the state, but I am forced to accept the decision, because the decision that is made comes with the power to punish. Power to punish because power is mostly identified in terms of its legal dimension. Because all those who come to power are identified to exercise this power with authority. So exercise of power with authority in terms of promoting domination is one aspect of power. So authority and power are interrelated, right? At least in the political sense. This is the first time that was identified both in terms of Marx as well as in terms of Weber. Marx argued that power is identified with respect to the ruling elite. So Marx was very vocal in arguing that power is always with the ruling class, right? Which helps in terms of promoting the interest of the ruling class, because Marx tried to identify the societal relations, the social relations within society in terms of class perspective. So Marx tried to identify and argue that every society is driven by two major classes, and the class perspective of the society is again dependent on the ownership of private property. So Marx argued that those who wield private property, they are the ones who control the state, because they are the ones who come to power. So that's the reason why Marx tries to identify that the ruling class interests are usually represented as the larger interest of the society. So even if the society does not have the similar interests, but it is projected and represented as the larger interest of the society, this is the capability of power. And that's the reason why Marx tries to identify power in terms of its hegemonic sense. Hegemonic sense means Marx argues that power helps in terms of controlling your own thoughts. Power helps in controlling thoughts means power helps in only propagating the ideas that are dominant with respect to the ruling class or propertied class. These ideas which appear to be the sole interest of the propertied class, are usually promoted as the larger interest of the society. For example, when Jawaharlal Nehru tried to identify that India needs industrialization. So in a way, he was in terms of promoting the larger interest of the industrial class in India, because he thought if industrialization takes place, if there is rapid industrialization into the Indian economy, it may help in terms of uplifting the poor in India. But for industrialization, you need some sort of a capital and technology. And at the stroke of Indian independence, Indian society did not have that luxury to focus in terms of both the development of the industries as well as the upliftment of people with a below poverty line. So we had to make a conscious choice. This conscious choice of promoting industrialization, in fact, made people sacrifice their interests for the sake of the national development. So this is how power, the ruling class power, helps in terms of promoting the ideas within the societies. So these ideas, if they gain acceptance across the society, the ideas that gain acceptance across the society are identified as hegemonic domination. Because even people who are not directly benefited, like the poor in India, continue to accept the thesis or the ideas that are promoted by the state, in the belief that industrialization may in future help to eradicate poverty. Right? So this is where you extract obedience. Extract obedience not out of force, not through violence, but when you try to extract obedience in terms of non-violent spread of ideas. So ideas which are part and parcel of every society, if these ideas appear to take a dominant position, if these ideas take or assume a dominant position in society, we try to identify them with hegemony. So hegemony is a non-violent exercise of power and authority. Non-violent exercise of power and authority by the representatives of the state. Representatives of the state means those who control the state. So that's the reason why Marx tried to identify power negatively. He never thought power is positive, because he argued that power and authority in fact helped in promoting the class interest of the propertied class. So it helps in exploitation. It helped in the exploitation of the propertyless class. This is the assumption that Marx had, and that's the reason why he argues that subsequently this idea of hegemony clearly expressed and identified in the writings of post-behavioral thinkers like Gramsci. So even Gramsci is the first important post-Marxism or neo-Marxist who developed his ideas based on this classical sense of class interest. He argued that the subalterns are exploited because of the presence of dominant hegemony within society. So Gramsci articulates that to prevent this hegemonic dominance, we need to develop the counter-hegemony. So counter ideas, because Gramsci argues that these hegemonic ideas are not just limited to the exercise of power and authority by the state. These ideas remain in circulation within the society, which are constantly produced and reproduced through various institutions in the society like media or the education or the social associations and organizations, including educational institutions, religious institutions, societal institutions, varied societal institutions. All these contribute to the existence of these dominant ideas as the most acceptable form of ideas. This is what he identified as hegemony. So Gramsci argues that to counter the dominant hegemony in society, we need to build the alternate or the counter hegemony. Counter hegemony means if the societal hegemony is created by the traditional set of elites, who helped in terms of promoting this societal hegemonic dominance, we need to create the true consciousness, because the societal elite, the traditional elite, assumptions are not promoting true consciousness. They are in fact identified as false consciousness. False consciousness in the sense the power that is captured by the state does not truly contribute to the universal progress and development of humanity. The power that is identified with the state is only limited in terms of promoting the interest of the ruling class or a particular class. This is the idea of hegemonic dominance. So he argues that traditional elite succeeded, or traditional intellectuals succeeded in terms of the spread of these ideas widely into the society. Not only they are limited, they originate in the state, but they are also widely circulated into the society, which are constantly produced and reproduced. So Gramsci favored a counter hegemony, and these counter hegemonic ideas have to come from the organic intellectuals. Organic intellectuals means from the subalterns who constitute a majority in society. So, subalterns means those who are deprived of this ownership of private property. So he argues that the need of the hour is to develop these organic intellectuals. So intellectuals from within the subaltern class, which may help in terms of creating an alternative hegemonic ideas. Alternative hegemonic ideas based on true consciousness, not based on false consciousness. So Marx argues that the power and authority vested in the state will continue to uphold the traditional intellectuals' value system. So that's the reason why he argues that what is needed is to bring a revolution, to bring a revolutionary transformation by destroying the institutions which are already existing. Because the hegemonic ideas remain in circulation because of this presence of these varied institutions. So he argues that what is needed is a revolutionary transformation of state and society. So alternate institutions, alternate education, alternate power structures have to be developed as part of a historical necessity to help overcome the established hegemony. So that is the reason why power and authority are specifically identified in terms of maintaining or promoting the hegemonic domination in every society. So fascism also survived. Fascism also survived and penetrated because of this hegemonic domination. Right? Fascism, in fact, succeeded in terms of erasing the distinction between state and society. So it was an ideology which was so powerful, which rejected the pillars of enlightenment. Pillars of enlightenment, because fascism believed not in reason and rationality, but they believed in passion and emotions. Because if you are governed by reason and rationality, you may tend to think more and act less, because reason and rationality always prevent the humans from moving towards passionate feelings and actions. And that's the reason why fascism in fact upholded a principle which is very popular: act not think. So act not think means where you should act based in terms of this momentary lapse of reason. So your actions are not necessarily be rational and reasonable. You have to act as based on passion and emotions. That's the reason why fascism does not promote the individual liberty and freedom. but it promotes this, faith and obedience towards the leader. They believe that leaders are born, and that's the reason why unquestionable faith with respect to the leadership is also one of the characteristic feature of a fascist rule, right? So who controls the state, in fact, shapes who exercises power and authority. So Marx considered that state comes into existence, or the power and authority identified with the state will help in terms of promoting or controlling the ideas that remain dominant or that ideas that remain in circulation within society. So control over ideas is what Marx identifies with respect to this idea of power and authority. So if power and authority is legitimate or illegitimate, legitimate means if power and authority are exercised through the consent of the people, or the power and authority is exercised without any consent of the people, right? That helps in terms of identifying whether it is a legitimate authority or illegitimate authority. Mostly when you look at societies where the military takes over the government, that means military attempts a coup. Coup means displace the democratically elected government and establish a military rule, a bureaucratic rule. Military rule or a bureaucratic rule is something that is identified as illegitimate because it tried to replace a legitimate form of government, a legitimate democratic form of government which was based on the consent of the people. The people choose a government, right? That becomes legitimate. In case if you try to tamper with that government, remove that government and replace it with some other form of government which is not based on consent of the people, we try to identify it as an illegitimate form of government. So this also applies, this reasoning and logic also applies to all those members of political parties who defect from one political party to another political party. Because people's mandate is very clear. They choose a nominee of a political party based on his identification with a particular party. So if he is elected from a particular party, that means the people's willing consent is behind the election of a particular candidate, right? So he has to commit himself to the ideas and ideology of the political party from which he is elected. If he defects from that elected political party to another political party, then he is going against the willing consent of the people. In case if he wishes to do so, he has to resign and get re-elected, because ultimately it has to be based on the consent of the people, willing consent of the people, which should be the basis for any legitimate form of government, right? So this a brief explanation in terms of what legitimacy is, because we cannot find legitimacy without having focused attention with respect to the consent of the people. So why people obey the law? Because they have given their willing consent, and that is where legitimacy is established, right? This legitimacy helps in terms of preventing both this hegemonic domination in society and also in terms of works as an instrument to limit the power and authority. So power, authority, legitimacy, hegemony are all different forms and dimensions of power. Different forms and dimensions of power as it is exercised. So to counter Marx, we find Weber. Max Weber also, who tried to deal with respect to this idea of power and authority. For Weber, the power definitely accepts that the power comes with this focus of exploitation. So he argues that what is important is the maintaining a separation between power and authority. So he argues that authority comes in three dimensions. Authority which is traditional, authority which is charismatic, authority which is legal rational. And within these three dimensions of authority, which he tries to identify as three ideal types. Because Weber argues that every society, every constituent society has some form of all three present in every society. So they are considered to be ideal types, which are not really practicable in any society. So we find most of the societies in terms of this combination of these ideas. For example, take India. In India, we have traditional authority, particularly in the presence of the Kap Panchayats, right, where they act as parallel administration. Secondly, we also have charismatic authority. Presently, for the example, take the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the most popular figure in India. There is a loyalty which is behind the Prime Minister in India. As long as loyalty sustains, he continues to maintain his charisma. Loyalty comes through blind faith towards the leader, unquestionable faith, right, where everyone starts believing in the ability of the leadership, right? Once people start questioning, then the charismatic factor is accounted. Got it? So what is needed is, as long as the leader sustains this element of loyalty, charisma of the leader continues to be upheld. But Weber argues that what is most important is the legal rational authority. So this is something that he identified with bureaucracy. So unlike Marx, Weber maintains a distinction and argues that bureaucracy does not represent the class interest. He tried to identify bureaucracy as a universal class. That means a class which is not identified with property dimension. So for him, bureaucracy is a universal class which works for the welfare of all people. So neither traditional authority nor charismatic authority, but Weber gives his stamp, his acceptance to this legal rational authority or the bureaucratic authority, which he considers as rational. Rational means which does not come with any self-interest. So he argues that all modern societies are represented by bureaucracy. So bureaucracy as a rational entity shall help in terms of development within society. So the presence of bureaucracy helps in terms of mitigating or reducing the class differences within the society. So he tried to identify modern state as a legal rational authority because modern state is controlled by this instrument, that is bureaucracy. This is how Weber tried to identify, even though Weber argues that power comes with domination, authority and exploitation, but legal rational authority is something that is appreciated in every society. So the development of bureaucracy is where the power and authority should remain. This is the idea that Weber tried to promote to counter the Marxist idea of class struggle in every society. So instead, he argues that bureaucracy may help in terms of promoting class harmony in society. So very idealistic proposition as far as Weber is concerned. So the power is identified to exercise control within the society, right? So similarly, when you look at elites within the society, they try to identify that power comes with the ability to set the agenda. So elitists argue that power is with those individuals who are capable of setting the agenda. For example, take the agenda or the manifesto of the political parties. For example, take the manifesto of the Bharatiya Janata Party. So Bharatiya Janata Party came with an express ideology wherein it tried to set the agenda in terms of building Ram Ayodhya temple, in terms of introducing uniform civil code, and in terms of abrogating Article 370. Article 370 within the Indian Constitution. All these are identified as the agenda of a political party or agenda represented by the elite of a particular political party, right? So agenda setting is what happens once you come to power. So when they come to power, legitimate power and authority, they try to realize this agenda. So agenda setting is how power and authority help in terms of establishing Marx countered this with stating that, in fact, Marx did not counter this. Marx, in fact, identified it differently in terms of class perspective and argued that this power and authority helps in terms of promoting class interest, right? But when you look at the other dimension of power, the pluralists argue that power helps in terms of reconciliation, because pluralists always believe that every society is constituted of multiple groups, plural groups within society. So the struggle within the groups help the state to perform the role of neutral arbiter. So the power and authority identified with the state is exercised according to the pluralist in terms of decision making. So power and authority is identified to make the decision which is appropriate. So we find three different understanding of power and authority. One's the Marxist idea of power and authority, which is shaped by this understanding of control over thought, the hegemonic ideas. Second, the elitist idea of power, which is identified in terms of agenda setting. Third, the pluralist idea of power, which identifies itself as a neutral arbiter, state as a rational entity, trying to operate, trying to help in terms of making a decision. But all three are identified mostly with respect to the negative dimension. But there is also a positive dimension of power. Positive dimension of power, in fact, is recognized in the writings of French philosopher Michel Foucault. We find this positive dimension of power also in the writings of Gramsci and Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, as far as our syllabus is concerned, they try to identify power not in the negative sense, power in the positive sense. For them, power is not something which helps in terms of promoting violence. For them, power is something that is identified with a productive purpose. For example, Foucault argues that there is some sort of a disciplinary power which is in circulation within the society. So this idea of power is not in the hands of any one individual. He argues that it remains in circulation as part of the disciplinary power. And you can find this idea of power in action within the societal relations. For example, a student and teacher, a father and son. Likewise, everywhere you find some sort of a disciplinary power. And he argues that this idea of disciplinary power is very fundamental in terms of promoting production. Without disciplinary power, probably no one would have got into production. Nobody would have got into productive labor. But what this disciplinary power in fact has helped is, it helped in identifying, according to Michel Foucault, it helped in identifying that the governmentality or the normalization process within society. So usually everyone in the society are expected to be identified with both the normal and abnormal behavior. So disciplinary power helped in terms of normalization of societal practices and values. So those who go against this normalization process are labeled as abnormal. And that is the reason why mental asylums are created within the society to label people as mad and send them to this mental asylum. And that's the reason why Foucault argues that the disciplinary power within the society does not help you to act freely, because your behavior is conditioned and shaped by the presence of disciplinary power within the society. And this disciplinary power is productive because it helped in terms of promoting productive purposes within the society. This is how Foucault tried to justify. And similar ideas are represented even in Hannah. So Hannah and Foucault does not recognize power negatively, but Hannah and Foucault try to recognize power positively. They recognize power positively in the sense they argue that power helps in terms of empowerment. Particularly, For Hanna, Hanna argues that power is not identified with any individual. She argues that power remains in circulation. Power is there where the collective is present, according to Hanna. So no individual, in fact, continues to hold this power. Power is always identified with those, with a collective. For example, if you have a grievance, if one single individual go and protest on the road, you are pulled out. But to overcome your grievance, if a collective is mobilized, this helps in terms of garnering the interest, right? This helps in terms of capturing the imagination of the state. So when the collective protests, there is a sense of power, that is a sui generis power, a power which arises from within this collective, right? This helps in terms of reformistic power. So collectively when you protest, that means it creates a power within. This power helps in terms of realizing your demands. So she argues that this is a reformative power. So if Foucault argues productive power, which helps in terms of empowerment, Hanna argues in terms of reformative power, which helps in terms of fostering or promoting change. And that's the reason why she always appreciated the revolutionary zeal expressed in history, like French Revolution or the American Revolution. They are all something that happened by the collective presence of people. So when people come together, then there is a power that it creates and generates. The power that is sui generis generates there and then itself. That is a reformative power or productive power, according to Hanna. So they try to identify, or the postmodernists in fact try to identify power positively. They try to identify power in terms of its positive dimension, that power helps in terms of empowerment, not in terms of power helps in terms of empowerment. Power is not negative, which prevents the empowerment of the people, right? So this is the reason why the postmodernist or post-behavioralist try to identify power authority differently. Got it? So we have different concepts within the political theory, and we try to identify the central role of the state with respect to all these various concepts. So in the understanding of this paper, all these 6 concepts, including the state, justice, equality, rights, democracy and power, are very central. Probably if you understand these concepts, fundamental concepts, then it helps in terms of, grasping this paper without any problem and challenge.